I grew up as a military brat. My dad was in the Army, so I always lived in an Army environment. And then as I started getting into high school and a little bit closer to making a college decision, I had a lot of people encouraging me to go to West Point. My dean of faculty at Georgia Military Academy said, "Don't go to the Air Force Academy. It'll be 50 years before that place amounts to anything." And I said, "Yeah, but I want to fly jets." And he said, "Well, you can fly jets if you go to West Point." I said, "No, I really want to fly jets." And so went to the Air Force Academy very well prepared. Georgia Military Academy prepared me so well that I basically validated academics for the fourth class year. I was put in advanced placement, history and English and math and everything because of that background from Georgia Military Academy. But I loved being at the Academy, which I guess means I'm a little bit crazy. But I loved every minute of it. And so I never had any doubts about getting through, and I never had any doubts about what I wanted to do. Well, I learned loyalty to classmates, but loyalty to the honor system, and I was glad to have that with me as I left the Academy. And I ran into an Air Force that was not quite that way. I mean, the founders created the Air Force Academy to up the sense of integrity within the officer corps. And so that was the attitude I took into the Air Force, and I irritated a few people, but I think we collectively, those early grads, changed the culture of the Air Force in the direction the founders intended. I was involved in poli-sci, so I went to a lot of poli-sci conferences at West Point and at VMI and at VPI. Very active summer training programs that would take us overseas or to the bases here in the United States. And in one case, I went to pilot indoctrination at Moody Air Force Base and got 15 hours in a T-37. So suddenly I'm up here, ready to solo. So I went into pilot training already not afraid of the T-37, not getting sick anymore and all those things that made a big difference in getting me through pilot training in such great shape. It was after pilot training and into F-105 training, and I met actually in the Nellis Air Force Base parking lot, and I was working on my Corvette, and so I was dirty and greasy, and that's when we first met. So we got married in 1968, and the rest is history. After pilot training, went to F-105 school, and this was the third class of undergraduate pilot training graduates who went straight into the F-105. But we did fine. We graduated the class just fine and went off to our various pursuits. I went to McConnell Air Force Base, Kansas, and they seasoned us by giving us 40 hours a month for 3 months. So we went from 120-hour F-105 pilots to 240-hour F-105 pilots, and that made a big difference in our survival when we finally went to combat. So the first TDY tour was with the 562nd Squadron, and that went up till about November, and then I volunteered to come back with a squadron that was going from PCS from McConnell back into the war. And so we went with them, and during that time my mission total ran to about 153 over North Vietnam, 185 total. And then back to McConnell, and I was, except for Carl Richter and a couple of other folks, and Carl didn't make it back, I was the high time guy, and so as a lieutenant, I was going to be an instructor. I learned to lead, and I learned to, and I got to know a bunch of terrific folks who went off to fight the war from our instruction. It was a very special time, and I was able to take advantage of it and build time fast and get to know the F-105 very well. Yeah, the Olmsted Scholarship was great. It was wonderful. At that time, Olmsted Scholars were getting to go to Geneva. And so I went to Defense Language School, went over to the Institute for International Studies in Geneva, which is where the Swiss government trains its diplomats. And so it was a very eclectic bunch there in the Graduate Institute, and did 2 years there and acquired what's called a licence en sciences politiques, a master's equivalent. But at the end of that, my friend Ted Reese was in the personnel system down at Randolph. And I said, I can't stand this. We're still losing guys. We got guys that have been trapped in the Hanoi Hilton for all this time. I got to go back and try to fix that. And so I did, and Kay was not happy about that, and she told me so. And occasionally, when I do something bad, she will remind me of that. It was a very worthwhile tour for me, and I got to do what I wanted to do, which I couldn't do on my first 2 tours, and that was lead. I had this drive, and I don't know where it came from, probably the academy, that said you got to lead, and you got to be there and engaged with whatever conflict your country's in, because that's what you're about. The old cliche, it's the only war we got. It wasn't really that. It was a responsibility. I'd been to the academy. I had all this knowledge and education bestowed upon me, and I owed it back. It was payback time to get in that war and stay in it until I won it. Well, I didn't exactly get to win it, but on the other hand, I did get to spend a lot of time in it. Came back to the States from being a Wild Weasel and went to Armed Forces Staff College, and then went to the Air Force Academy to teach. And spent 3 years at the Academy teaching political science and also being an AOC. I was also deputy exec for honor and ethics to the commandant. And so I spent some time sitting on honor boards with the cadets and advising them. And it was a cadet honor code that we were advising, and because we had a whole bunch of medals on our chest from having been through the wars, the cadets paid attention. I went back into the fighter world, George Air Force Base, California, for 4 years, back into the F-105, the sunset of the F-105 Wild Weasel, and then brought the first F-4G Wild Weasel into service, getting ready, as it turned out, for Desert Storm. And so we were devising tactics and how to use the Weasels. And so I did that for 4 years, went off to Saudi Arabia. I went off to senior service school, which turned out to be the State Department senior service school. And so after that, I went into the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the policy area, which was a good place for me for about a year. And then a vacancy opened up in Saudi Arabia. And we took the family to Saudi Arabia, and I worked with the Saudis for 2 years. And that was a fascinating tour. Talk about cross-culture. We came back to Tyndall Air Force Base. And I was given command, getting to lead again, given command of something called Weapons System Evaluation Program. But I got to command it for 3 years, and I was told I could stay as long as I wanted, which was, I guess, quite a compliment. And we really advanced the state of air-to-air, our air-to-air missilery. That meant when our young folks went to war in Desert Storm and they hit that pickle button to shoot off an air-to-air missile, they knew it was going to work. That was a great tour, and I got to start flying the F-16 there then. And at the end of that 3-year tour, a friend of mine was going over to be 16th Air Force Commander, Scott Harp, and Scott wanted me as his vice. And working with a friend as a vice commander is a wonderful thing because basically we tag teamed it. He ran the Air Force when I was downrange. When he was downrange, I ran the numbered Air Force. And that's 20,000 people across 3,000 miles of territory with Gaddafi as your neighbor on the southern side. So it was a wonderful experience. And then it turned sad because Scott was killed in an F-16 accident in December of 1988. And I basically ran 16th Air Force for 3 months there until March of 1989. So that being a vice commander of 16th Air Force was a real character building job and was a real eye-opener. And some hard decisions had to be made, and I got to make them. Hope I didn't mess them up too bad. Worked with some great folks and for some great folks. After that, went to the Atlantic Council, and Atlantic Council is a think tank in Washington, and not much going on except that happened to be the time when the whole Soviet empire collapsed. And so I got to chronicle for our readership, and I wrote weekly extracts of unclassified sources as to how it was affecting the Russian military, the Soviet military, and watching them basically implode. And that was done in the ambassador's residence in Moscow. But that too was an interesting experience. And then at 27 years, I decided that it was time for me to go elsewhere. And so I did. I got picked up by a classmate, Harry Snow, who has recently passed away. And he had an airplane company that he was using to work on C-130s. And so retired in '90 and basically worked for 20 years on souping up the C-130. We were attacking Big Blue Air Force and trying to get them to take their older C-130s and let us soup them up to be short takeoff and landing airplanes. I never managed to get them to accept our short takeoff and landing version of the C-130, although we're seeing bits and pieces of that now, but the whole enchilada was a bridge too far for our Air Force to reach for. But it was fun trying to persuade them, and I got to fly again. I got to fly the chase ship to chase this modified C-130. And so it's all been part of an adventure, a wonderful adventure in aviation, and I have no regrets. The biggest watershed was meeting her and having the good judgment to ask her to marry me, and her having the poor judgment to accept. And we ended up with 3 and an adoption. And our kids are our joy. I mean, they continue to be an inspiration for us and what our life is all about and our life's major accomplishments. You know, you end up with stuff on your shoulders, you end up with stuff on your chest, but what you really end up with is the kids that follow you into life. I think the best hope of our society is institutions like the Air Force Academy. And so that's the one I'm most familiar with. And as it happens, because of my several cancers, the VA in its wisdom has said, okay, you're 100% disabled. And that means extra money that we don't need. This house is paid for, the house up in the hills is paid for, and we are quite comfortable. So the extra money that comes from the Veterans Administration and from combat-related special compensation from the Air Force, those are all extra funds that we get, and what better place to put them to use than at the Air Force Academy. I know it's small potatoes compared to what the other foundation members are able to do, but it's important to me that I make a contribution. These are things that I can really identify with that are making a qualitative difference in the heritage of the Academy and in the lives of the cadets who are there. It's not so easy for the FAA to clear someone to climb into a jet-powered airplane at nearly 80 years of age. And so I'm not even asking the question. My aviation medical examiner said, if you want to keep flying, don't come see me. And so I haven't seen her. I didn't go back to see her, and I just keep flying in the glider and doing so safely. I just renewed my glider instructor ticket for another 2 years. And intend to keep teaching acrobatics and unusual attitudes and people to fly in a glider as long as I'm able. There are 50,000 graduates, and there are so many graduates who have done so much. But what's impressed me about watching this panoply of distinguished graduates each year is the nobility of the Academy's purpose and its graduates. And being ushered into that hallowed group, many of them are friends, some of them I've taught, is really a remarkable experience and a humbling one, because I know what those people have done. I've read their bios, and they have knocked it right out of the park. Me, I was just a fighter pilot, just a simple airman doing his job, loving life, loving his family, and doing what he could to make the Academy a better place. So it's gratifying, but at the same time humbling to be a part of that very august group. It's been a heck of a ride. I would do it all again. That shows I have a very flat learning curve. I would do it all again, probably just as I have. The important thing was helping to make the world a better place, and that's the charge I've given our kids. Whatever you do in life, make the world better for those who follow. And that's probably not done them any favors, but I think that's a real good reason for being on this earth and being allowed to live as long as I have been.